Hi friends, and welcome to Folklore Diaries. Here, we share real-life horror stories and chilling legends from around the world. Some of them happen to our listeners, others have been passed down for years. So get comfortable but stay alert, because the next story might just keep you awake tonight. And if you like true horror stories, consider subscribing. Okay, let's begin. Chicago in the late 1800s was alive with noise and ambition. The streets rattled with the wheels of horse-drawn carriages, while vendors shouted their wares on every corner. Smoke rose from factory chimneys, mixing with the smell of roasted chestnuts, leather, and damp cobblestones after rain. The city was booming, and it seemed that every young man or woman with a dream wanted to come here to make a life. Among them was Thomas Avery, a 23-year-old clerk from a small town in Ohio. Thomas was not extraordinary, but he was full of hope. He dreamed of finding better work, earning more money, and perhaps even saving enough to bring his younger sister to the city one day. He carried only a small suitcase, his best coat, and a pocket watch that had once belonged to his father. When he arrived at the busy train station, the air itself felt thick with opportunity and danger. Chicago was known for both. Newspapers spoke of fortunes made in the meatpacking industry, in real estate, and in the grand preparations for the coming World's Fair. But they also whispered about crime, corruption, and things better left unspoken in the darker parts of the city. It was at the corner of 63rd Street and Wallace Avenue that Thomas first saw the strange new building that locals had begun to call the Castle. At first glance, it looked like any other large, respectable hotel. The brick exterior was impressive, with sharp lines and neatly painted signs offering rooms for rent and newly built modern hotel. Windows dotted the facade, though some were strangely placed, as if they belonged to rooms that couldn't possibly exist. Thomas felt a curious shiver run through him, though he brushed it off. After all, he was tired from travel, and the hotel stood only a block from where he had hoped to find temporary lodging. It seemed perfect, too perfect, perhaps. As he pushed open the heavy front door, a bell tinkled softly, announcing his arrival. The lobby smelled faintly of polish and smoke. The gas lamps glowed with a warm yellow light, and the wallpaper was patterned with dark green leaves that curled like vines. A desk stood in the center, where a tall man in a crisp suit looked up with a practiced smile. "Welcome," the man said smoothly. "You've come to the right place. I am Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, the owner." Thomas nodded politely, unaware that the name would one day be remembered in horror. To him, Holmes seemed charming, his eyes bright, his mustache perfectly trimmed, his manner confident but not overbearing. He looked like a man of education and success, the kind of figure young men admired. Holmes asked a few questions in a soft, musical voice, where Thomas had come from, what brought him to Chicago, and whether he preferred a quiet room. Each question felt friendly, though Holmes's eyes seemed to study him more closely than a normal innkeeper's should. Within minutes, Thomas found himself signed into the guest book, his name carefully written among many others. A porter, silent and pale, appeared to carry his suitcase. The hallways of the hotel stretched strangely. As Thomas followed, he noticed the corridor seemed longer than the outside of the building should have allowed. The gaslights flickered, casting shadows that bent in unnatural ways. Doors lined the hall, but some stood locked with heavy bolts, while others had no knobs at all. His room was small but tidy, with a single bed, a washstand, and a narrow window that overlooked the street below. Everything seemed ordinary enough, though the air felt thick, almost stale, as if it hadn't been opened for weeks. That night, Thomas lay awake listening. The walls groaned like they were alive, and from somewhere above he heard the sound of footsteps, though they stopped abruptly as if swallowed by silence. Once he could have sworn he heard a faint cry, high, broken, and quickly cut off. He told himself it must be the wind, or perhaps other guests. He pulled the blanket tighter around him, trying to sleep. But even in his dreams, the hotel seemed to stretch and twist, becoming a maze where every turn led to a locked door, and every locked door hid something terrible. The next morning, Thomas came down for breakfast. A few other guests sat quietly at the tables, their faces pale, their eyes tired. None of them spoke much. A woman in a blue dress seemed nervous, glancing often toward the stairs. A man with a suitcase ate quickly and left, never once lifting his gaze. Holmes moved easily among them, offering polite words, his voice low and reassuring. He seemed like the perfect host, yet Thomas noticed how the man's eyes lingered, always watching, always measuring. After breakfast, Thomas decided to explore a little. He wandered the second floor, where the hallways bent in odd angles. Twice he thought he had turned back toward his room, only to find himself at a locked door with no knob. He tested it gently, but it did not budge. From the other side came the faintest scratching sound, like nails on wood. When he finally returned to his room, slightly unnerved, he found his suitcase open, though he had locked it. Nothing seemed to be missing, but his pocket watch had been moved from the top of his shirts to the bottom, as if someone had searched carefully and then replaced it. That night, the cries returned. Louder this time. A muffled thud echoed through the walls, and then silence again. Thomas pressed his ear to the plaster, heart pounding. The sound came from the room next to his, yet according to the hallway, there was no room next to his. His wall should have bordered a stairwell. For the first time since arriving in Chicago, Thomas felt something stronger than curiosity. He felt fear. Still, he told himself, it was only an old building, settling with the night. Only tired nerves after too much travel. He did not yet know that the hotel itself was a trap, and that every brick had been designed not for comfort, but for death. The next morning broke gray and heavy, the streets of Chicago hidden beneath a mist that rolled in from the lake. From his narrow window, Thomas watched the shapes of people moving below like shadows. The city looked endless, yet strangely distant. He could not shake the memory of the cries he had heard in the night, nor the thought of his suitcase being disturbed. He forced himself to focus on the day ahead. He had come to Chicago with a purpose, to find work. He dressed carefully, tucked his father's watch into his pocket, and made his way down to the lobby. Holmes was there, as always, immaculate in his dark suit. His smile was friendly, though Thomas thought he caught the faintest hint of amusement in it, as though the doctor knew something he did not. "Off to explore?" Holmes asked warmly. "Yes, sir," Thomas replied. "Looking for opportunities." Holmes nodded, his eyes sharp. "This city has everything a young man could desire. But do be careful. It is easy to lose your way in Chicago." The words were ordinary enough, but something in his tone made Thomas's stomach tighten. That day passed in frustration. The businesses he visited had no work to offer, or they promised to send word later. By evening, Thomas returned to the hotel tired and disappointed. The lobby seemed quieter than before. Only one guest sat in the corner, a woman in a pale yellow dress, staring into her teacup as though lost in thought. Her hands trembled slightly. Holmes greeted Thomas with his usual calm, asking about his day. The doctor's gaze lingered on him with an intensity that was both flattering and unnerving. Later, as Thomas climbed the stairs to his room, he noticed something strange. A door he had passed that morning now stood ajar. He glanced inside and saw only darkness, but the smell that drifted out made his skin crawl, a sour, metallic odor like rust or old blood. He shut the door quickly and walked faster. That night, the hotel revealed more of its secrets. Thomas lay awake again, listening to the creaks and groans of the walls. Around midnight, he heard footsteps outside his door. They paused, then moved on. A moment later, he heard a faint knock, 3 slow taps, from somewhere down the hall. Curious, he rose and opened his door. The hallway stretched into shadow, gaslights flickering weakly. No one was there. He stepped out, his bare feet cold against the wooden floor. As he walked, he noticed something odd. The hallway seemed different, as though the walls had shifted. He reached the corner where the stairwell should have been, but instead found another long passage lined with doors. He stopped, heart racing. Had he taken a wrong turn? Or had the building itself changed? From one of the doors came a sound, soft weeping, like a woman crying. He froze, unsure whether to call out. The weeping grew louder, then stopped suddenly, replaced by silence so deep it rang in his ears. Terrified, Thomas turned and hurried back, praying to find his own room again. When he finally stumbled inside, Slamming the door behind him, he leaned against it, trembling. The cries had been real. The hallway had shifted. He knew it. Yet when he peered through the crack under his door, the corridor outside looked perfectly ordinary. The following morning, the woman in the yellow dress was gone. Thomas noticed it at breakfast. Her chair, where she had sat silently the day before, was empty. He asked the server, a pale, silent man with downcast eyes, whether she had left. The man only shrugged, avoiding his gaze. Later, Thomas glanced at the guest book on the front desk. The woman's name had been neatly crossed out with black ink, as though she had never been there at all. A cold dread settled in his stomach. That evening, another guest disappeared. This time it was the businessman with the suitcase. Thomas had seen him rush through his meals, eager to leave, but when night fell, the man was gone. Again, no one mentioned it. Again, his name was crossed out in the book. The silence of the other guests became unbearable. They avoided one another's eyes, spoke in whispers, and walked quickly through the halls. It was as if they knew, but dared not say what was happening. Thomas began to feel trapped. One night, he woke to the sound of metal scraping beneath his bed. Heart pounding, he leaned over the edge. To his horror, he saw a faint line in the floorboards, an outline of a trapdoor he had never noticed before. Something shifted beneath it. He heard a muffled grunt, as though someone were moving in the space below his room. The scraping grew louder, and he realized with sickening clarity that the trapdoor could open at any moment. He pressed his weight against it until the noise stopped, then lay awake until dawn, every muscle trembling. Days blurred together. The hotel felt less like a place of lodging and more like a living maze. Hallways changed length. Doors appeared where none had been before. Locks clicked on their own. Once, Thomas opened what he thought was a door to the stairwell, only to find a brick wall behind it. At meals, fewer guests appeared. Holmes remained ever smiling, ever kind, but his eyes glittered with something dark, something predatory. And then came the night Thomas could no longer deny the truth. It began with a scream. Sharp, sudden, and cut short, the sound ripped through the silence of the second floor. Thomas leapt from his bed, heart hammering. He opened his door just in time to see a pale hand vanish behind another door down the hall. He ran toward it, but when he reached the door and threw it open, he found only darkness. The room was empty. No furniture, no window, just four walls and the stench of blood. He staggered back, gasping. He knew then that the hotel was not a normal place. It was a trap built with purpose. People were vanishing not by accident, but by design. And the smiling doctor who welcomed him so warmly was the architect of it all. The hotel was no longer a place of rest. For Thomas, it had become a cage. Every corner, every hallway, every locked door pressed against him with invisible weight. The air itself seemed poisoned with whispers of those who had come before him, guests who checked in with hope, only to vanish without a trace. He began to watch Holmes more closely. The doctor's polite charm now seemed like a mask carefully worn. His voice, once smooth and comforting, now carried the quiet authority of a man who believed himself untouchable. Holmes spoke to the guests with kindness, yet his eyes told another story. They flickered with hunger, the way a wolf might watch sheep before the slaughter. Thomas knew he had to leave. The longer he stayed, the closer the walls seemed to close in. One evening, after supper, Thomas made his decision. He would pack his things, slip out quietly, and find lodging elsewhere, even if it cost him dearly. No job, no city was worth this dread. But as he left his room with his suitcase in hand, he realized the front stairwell was gone. In its place stood a hallway he had never seen before, lined with identical doors. Panic fluttered in his chest. He turned left, then right, trying to find his way back, but the corridors twisted like the insides of a labyrinth. He ran faster, his suitcase bumping against his leg, his breath shallow. Every hallway looked the same, and then he saw it. A door slightly open, faint light spilling from within. Hope surged through him. Perhaps it led to the street. Perhaps it was the exit. He pushed it wide. The room inside was wrong. It was bare, windowless, the walls covered in metal panels that glinted dully in the gaslight. Hooks hung from chains in the ceiling. The smell of chemicals burned his throat. Against one wall stood a large iron box, its door open like the mouth of a furnace. Inside, he saw charred bones. He staggered back, bile rising in his throat. This was no guest room. It was a place of death. And then the door slammed shut behind him. "Curiosity," came a voice, smooth and amused. "It is always the downfall of young men." Holmes stepped from the shadows, his suit immaculate, his mustache sharp against his pale face. His eyes gleamed with cruel delight. "You've wandered quite far, Mr. Avery," he said softly. "Most of my guests are not so bold. They sleep, they vanish, and they are forgotten. But you seek answers." Thomas tried to speak, but no words came. His legs trembled, his heart pounded against his ribs. Holmes tilted his head. "Do not be afraid. Death, after all, is only another room. And I am the architect." With that, he pulled a lever on the wall. The floor beneath Thomas shifted, tilting suddenly. His suitcase slid across the room. Thomas grabbed the wall to steady himself, realizing with horror that the entire floor was built to move, like the false bottom of a trap. Holmes watched with fascination, as though studying a specimen. "Young men like you come here every week," he said calmly. "They dream of success. They hope for fortune. But what they find, Mr. Avery, is me." Desperation gave Thomas strength. With a cry, he lunged for the door, slamming his shoulder against it. Miraculously, it burst open. He stumbled into the hall and ran, not caring where he went, only that he escaped. Behind him, Holmes's footsteps echoed, calm and steady. He did not run. He did not need to. The building itself was his ally. Thomas tore through corridors that twisted in impossible ways. He opened one door only to find a brick wall. Another led to a staircase that descended into blackness, the air reeking of decay. Somewhere below, chains rattled. He fled upward instead, toward a narrow hall lit by a single lamp. He tried another door. It opened into a bedroom, where the bed was stained dark with something that had soaked deep into the mattress. The smell made his stomach twist. "Do you see now?" Holmes's voice carried through the walls, soft and mocking. "This is not a hotel. It is a castle, and every stone, every passage was built for one purpose." Thomas slammed the door shut and kept running. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but terror drove him on. At last he reached a window at the end of a hall. He rushed to it, only to find it bricked over from the outside. No escape. Behind him, Holmes appeared, his footsteps still unhurried. His shadow stretched across the hall like the shadow of death itself. "You cannot leave, Mr. Avery," he said softly. "No one leaves. This place was made to hold you, to swallow you, to erase you." Thomas backed against the wall, chest heaving. He searched desperately for a weapon, anything at all. His hand brushed against a metal candlestick on a side table. He seized it, holding it like a sword. Holmes only smiled. "Bravery. I admire that." With sudden speed, he lunged. The two men crashed against the wall, the candlestick clattering to the floor. Thomas struggled wildly, but Holmes was stronger, his grip iron around his throat. "You will be forgotten," Holmes whispered. "Just like the others." Darkness closed in around Thomas's vision. But in one final surge, he reached into his pocket and pulled free his father's watch. With all his strength, he smashed it against Holmes's temple. The doctor reeled back, startled more than injured. Thomas seized the chance. He ran past him, down the hall, through a stairwell that seemed to appear from nowhere. He stumbled, fell, rose again. At last he burst through a side door into the cold night air of Chicago. Thomas never looked back. He fled the city that very night, boarding the first train out. He never spoke of what he had seen, not to police, not to family. He feared no one would believe him. But others told their stories. Others disappeared, and slowly rumors grew. Years later, when H. Holmes was finally arrested, the world would learn the truth. Behind the walls of his hotel, his murder castle, were secret chambers, trapdoors, hidden passages, gas pipes for suffocation, acid vats, and furnaces large enough to burn bodies. It was not a hotel at all. It was a factory of death, built by a man whose charm hid a monstrous soul. Thomas lived to see Holmes hanged in 1896. Yet even then, he never returned to Chicago. In his dreams, he still walked those endless halls, still heard the cries behind locked doors, still felt the hotel closing in around him. And he knew, as long as he lived, that the castle would never truly let him go. Thank you for listening to tonight's story. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And remember, not every shadow is empty, and not every voice in the dark is in your head. Good night, and stay safe.